For this chapter, we're discussing how we use the ocean. So this is chapter 17 of your textbook. There's lots of different ways we use the ocean, and some of these terms you've probably never heard before. So we're going to walk through a few of them. Not a lot, so it should be pretty quick today. The first term is algin. Algin is a compound that comes from seaweed. So when we talk a lot about kelp and other large plants that live in the ocean, some of them are harvested for this compound called algin. Sorry, I'm having closed captioning problems today. It doesn't appear to be working today. I apologize about that. The second term is aquaculture. Aquaculture is any type of farming in the ocean or lakes. That's how I think about it. So you can think about fish or oysters or clams or even seaweed. This is called aquaculture. Aqua, water, culture, growing. The third term is biological resources. Biological resources are anything that has a nature of biology, so living things that is useful. So a lot of people think of, seafood as an example. We harvest seafood to eat, but also biological resources include, when people go on ships to watch whales. Whales are biology and they're a resource. Different ways to use biological resources. Bycatch is a term I want you to know. Bycatch is when things are accidentally caught in nets. So for example, if you're fishing for shrimp and you catch a turtle or a dolphin that dies because they breathe air and they get stuck in the net, that's bycatch. Bycatch is not useful. Usually it's discarded, it's put back in the ocean, but it's something you want to avoid if at all possible. And we'll talk about ways to avoid it. Commercial extinction is a little bit different than the term extinction that you may hear sometimes. Extinction by itself means a species is gone. There's no more of that species that exists, right? So a good example would be the dodo bird. There's no more dodo birds on this planet. They've all been killed, unfortunately. And so they are extinct. Commercial extinction is when there's so few individuals of a species left, like say tuna, that it's not worth the cost, the effort to catch and harvest them, right? So they're commercially extinct. Desalination is becoming more and more common, especially in California, unfortunately. Desalination is a process where you take ocean water and you remove the salt to have fresh water that you can drink. So you can't drink ocean water, it has salt in it, it makes you sick, and please don't do that. It's not very pleasant at all. But if you remove the salt, then you can drink it. You can use it for farming. You can use it for animals, lots of different things. The problem with desalination is when you remove the salt, you have to do something with it. And unfortunately, a lot of the salt in this type of process is not the type of salt that you can put on food, right? It's a different type of salt in terms of kind of health for humans. So we'll talk more about that hopefully in class. Drift net is mostly, people don't use these much anymore because they don't work very well, quite frankly. They're called a drift net because they're a very large net that you put in the ocean and you just let it go and it drifts. And then you find the net and you take out whatever's caught in it. That's one way to do it. it's not effective, in my opinion. You get a lot of bycatch. But anyway, next term I want you to know is called Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ. The EEZ is an area from the coastline of a country to 200 nautical miles offshore. The only fishing ships that can operate in a country's EEZ is that country's. So, for example, in the United States, we have an EEZ of 200 nautical miles. Ships from Mexico, ships from France, ships from Canada cannot fish in those areas, right? They're exclusive economic zones. It applies to seafood, but it also applies to other things like oil and gas and minerals, which are very valuable. The high seas are, it's strange they put this in as a term or concept. High seas is essentially beyond the exclusive economic zone. In my opinion, the high seas is out of the jurisdiction of anyone. No one's in control of it. Anything can happen out there, right? That's the high seas. So no one's in charge. It's just lots of things happen out there. Mostly illegal, right? Like drug trades and, illegal fishing and, illegal activity. But the high seas are an area, it's a lot actually of the ocean. If you look at a map of the EEZs and what is outside of them, I think you'd be surprised at how much of the ocean is unregulated. The law of the sea was, I believe it was the 1950s, was created. And essentially it led to the exclusive economic zones. That's really all I want you to know about law of the sea. There's other laws of the seas, but even marine scientists don't pay much attention to them. It's not like, police are out there enforcing it, unfortunately. Mariculture is very similar to aquaculture, but mariculture specifically involves animals that live, or plants that live in the ocean. Mara, ocean. Aquaculture is any water. Could be ocean, could be lakes, could be rivers. Mariculture, just the ocean. Marine energy resources is just a really unnecessarily fancy way of saying oil, gas, and there's some others, but things that we take out of the ocean that we use to make energy. Technically, wind turbines are considered marine energy resources, right? So if you look at, we'll talk about this in class, if you look at the wind turbines off of Rhode Island and Maine, they're in the ocean, they're producing energy, and they're a resource. So technically, they're a marine energy resource. Next term is maximum sustainable yield. Again, really big unnecessary term. What this means is how much of a species, tuna, flounder, oysters, whatever, that you can harvest, you can take for human consumption or use without making that species go extinct. Maximum sustainable yield. And the magic number, which you'll hear about in class, and you'll also see this on the exam, is 50%. Most species, if you take too little, you aren't optimizing their growth. If you take too much, you're depressing their growth. So you want to be kind of 50% of the population, their growth. Methane hydrate is a marine energy resource. It's kind of new. I'm surprised they have it in here. It's essentially methane, which is a fossil fuel gas. So if you ever cook on an outdoor grill with or you go camping and you have the little gas cylinders, right? You screw in and then you turn on the gas and goes shh, and then you light it and go, and you have a little fire. Most of that is either methane or propane. They're essentially, I mean, for this class, they're a fossil fuel gas. Now, the methane, when it's deep in the ocean, can get, and this sounds kind of weird to say, it gets surrounded by water. And what this means is the molecule of methane, the CH4, has essentially a cage of water, H2O, H2O, H2O. And when this happens, it creates a solid structure. It looks just like ice. Well, I think it looks like ice. It's a solid, right? So methane hydrate is a solid that you can pick up, and it looks just like ice. And if you take a match or a lighter and you hold it to it, it will burn because it has methane in it, right? So that's methane hydrate. It is very abundant off of certain parts of the world like Japan and Oregon, actually, in the United States. And a lot of people are interested in it because you can use it as a marine energy resource and it's valuable. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Non-extractive resources, these are things that are resources that aren't taken out of the environment. So the example I used earlier of going to watch a whale, right? You go on a boat, watch the whales. It's awesome. You get to see the whales, you take pictures of them, whatever. You're not taking that whale out of the environment. You're not extracting, you're not removing it. If we were fishing for tuna and we catch a tuna and we take that tuna out of the ocean so we can eat, that is extractive. But if you're just out there watching the animals, enjoying it, going for a walk on the beach, that is non-extractive. You're not taking things out or away. Non-renewable resources, I want you to know as well. Talked about fossil fuels a little bit. Fossil fuels ultimately come from, they come from dinosaurs, quite frankly. So if you look at them, they're buried in the ground, right? Oil, gas, whatever. And we dig them up, bring them to the surface, and we use them for things like cars and businesses and homes, whatever. There's no dinosaurs currently on Earth, nor will there ever be dinosaurs ever on Earth again. Probably. I think it's a pretty safe statement. Since that's the case, the fossil fuels in the ground, once we use them and burn them all up, they're gone. They will not be replaced. They are non-renewable. Now, an example of renewable, let's skip forward a little bit. An example of a renewable resource is sunlight. We will never run out of sunlight. Technically, the sun will implode in 3.5 billion years, but people don't consider that. I don't consider it either. It's renewable, right? So if I go out today and it's nice and sunny, I can capture all the sunlight I want. And you know what's going to happen tomorrow? There'll be just as much sunlight. And the day after, you can never use it up. And that's renewable. You'll never use it up. Overfishing is when you fish too much. You take too many fish out of the ocean. And this is unfortunately the norm. And the problem is we don't know how many fish are in the ocean. And so how do you know if you're taking too many if you don't know how many there are in the first place? And overfishing is a problem for sure. Physical resources. This is such a strange chapter. Physical resources are anything that exists. That's a resource. So you can think of the sand on a beach. You can think of a whale. You can think of oil. These are all physical resources. And you're probably thinking, well, what isn't a physical resource? Well, you can think, the way I think about it is if you're walking on the beach and just being outside or being at the beach or seeing a pretty sunrise or, watching birds fly, most of those probably are not physical resources, but you're getting benefit from it. You're enjoying it. So it's making you happy or you feel better or you're more relaxed, whatever it is, right? That benefit to you is not a physical resource. I forgot what it's called. They don't have the term in here, so don't worry about it. But you get some benefit from it that is not physical, right? You can't touch it, right? You can't touch your happiness, right? You can't touch your relaxation, but you have it, right? So that's an example of a non-physical resource. This next term is really interesting because for the longest time, I used to mispronounce it. And I'll tell you the proper pronunciation of it because I embarrassed myself so many times with saying it wrong. It's pronounced potable, potable. I won't tell you how I said it, but it's not that way. Potable water is water that is safe to drink, right? So if you ever, California is a good example. If you're ever in California and you see them watering plants on the side of the highway and they have big tanks that have non-potable water on the back, means you probably shouldn't be getting that water all over you or drinking it or eating the plants that it was sprayed on, right? It probably has things in there not so safe for humans, right? Maybe bacteria, maybe it hasn't been filtered as well as it should be for humans, etc. So that's potable waters. So if you're really thirsty and you see something that says potable water and non-potable, drink the potable. The next one is renewable. Already talked about that one. Territorial waters. It's essentially the exclusive economic zone, but for countries that have territories. So, the United States, for example, a territory is Puerto Rico, right? So because it's not a state, but because it's part of the United States, it's a territory, that area, that 200 nautical miles around it is technically the United States. So you can probably see why a lot of people are interested in small islands, especially in the Southwest Pacific. And the U.S. exclusive economic zone is essentially the same as the exclusive economic zone. It's a long story that's not worth going into, but it's essentially the same thing, 200 nautical miles. Okay, so that's it for today. And let me know if you got any questions.